This video is intended for amateur audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. I just had to do that. Anything for a chuckle, right? Bob Nagy here, AB5N, back with another radio review. Now, I know many of you have seen a lot of videos on the FTdx-10 and now the FT-710 by Yaesu. I got a little confused. Why would they release a radio so similar to the 10 in sequence with the 10? Because if you look at other brands, they sort of stage them and they're quite different from each other. But if you look back at Yaesu a little bit, you do realize that they have done this before. The FT-991, the FT-991A right after it, virtually identical radios. So maybe it's not as strange as it seems. So I thought I'd do one of my standard reviews. Let's get with it and take a look at these radios. Looking at the front panels first, the FTdx-10 has dual knobs where the VFO is. The rear one's a multi-use knob. Big, punchy, bright touchscreen, and nice layout. Overall, really good looking radio. The FT-710, slightly smaller. The second multifunction knob is gone. Bigger buttons, but a smaller screen, a little bit. It's still a touchscreen, and an overall interesting looking package. A real quick look at the back of these radios shows that on the back of the 10 we have almost all the I/O that you'd ever need, including 3 USB connectors and a legacy DB9 connector. On the 710 they've had to go to smaller mini DIN connectors to provide the same functionality, but really it's 95% as good as the 10. It's important to describe the difference in the basic design of these two radios. On the FTdx-10 it is a mixer type SDR. This is a slightly older technology when the analog to digital converter chips were too expensive to use by themselves. So they mixed the incoming RF signals down through an RF amplifier, you see the LNA, and one stage of superhet actually mixed it down to a much lower frequency where you could use an inexpensive chip that was available at the time to do the conversion. And this all happened at a lower frequency. After that, it goes into FPGA, which is a field programmable gate array chip that does all the digital magic and makes believe it's a radio, and it comes back out to the digital to analog converter to convert all those ones and zeros back into audio for you to hear. On the direct sampling, there's just bandpass filters in front of an RF amp, or the RF amp can go on either side actually. That goes right into the A to D chip, which is much more expensive than one that operates more at the audio frequency is used in the mixer design, and then goes into the FPGA and the D to A converter in the same manner. Actually, the Yaesus and many use 2 A to D chips because you're actually using one for the display screen and then one for the radio, and the Yaesu does this. So your direct sampling, and it's both 14-bit systems on here, are the FT-710 and the IC7300. A very good place to be if you're going to do cost-effective SDR radio. More bits is better, gives you a better dynamic range and such, but at 14 bits, and plus the use of dithering, it's called dithering, they add a little bit of noise in. It's called the IP Plus, I believe, on this 7300. They add a little bit of noise, custom crafted noise, to the incoming analog signal. And what that does is actually expand the dynamic range a little bit, and it tends to cut down on all kind of crazy little mixing products and spurs and generation of fake signals that you'd see on a spectral display of an SDR. So as crazy as it sounds, indeed, the dithering, which is on all the time in the Yaesu and selectable in the ICOM, actually increases dynamic range and reduces crazy responses that you might see in an SDR and phantom signals you'd see on the screen. But the mixer type SDR, which Yaesu went with the 101D, 101MP, and the FTdx-10, gave them the opportunity to sell you roofing filters. Well, there you go, aftermarket, more income. And it also enabled them to keep the cost of the radio down by using a less expensive A to D chip. So as we go along in time, higher quality A to D chips are available, and people can, ideally use a direct sampling approach in the future with cost-effective A to D chips that will be able to connect more directly, to the antenna, and that gives you a higher fidelity system theoretically. And I did want to mention that the Sherwood tested numbers of the FT-710 are actually a few dB superior to the numbers claimed by Yaesu. So it does definitely hit the benchmark numbers, actually betters them. On the FT-710, the screen is slightly smaller than the FTdx-10, but the layout and controls is virtually identical, except for a few small things. The screen on the 10, though, it seems to be a little bit brighter and crispier, and it is slightly larger. The main user complaint on the FTdx-10 was that the buttons to the left of the tuning dials were just too close to get in there and not bump one of the tuning dials when you press them. Now, I don't find this a problem because what I found is if I use the thumb on my right hand to press these buttons, it clears the tuning dials just fine. But this was the main complaint on the FTdx-10. A main complaint also was the lack of the ability to turn on averaging on the screen like you have on the ICOM, so that the noise or the grass, if you had it on the screen here, was really sort of distracting at a very high frame rate that this is capable of. Well, another thing I noticed though, and this is the FT-710, is that when you go to expand mode like this on the FTdx-10, you could just touch the waterfall area and the ratio between the waterfall and the spectrum scope would change into 3 different units. It'd be very small here, or medium, or large. This seems to be defaulted into large. There may be a way in the menus to change that. We'll take a look at that. With the FTdx-10, you could simply press this area of the waterfall and change that ratio of waterfall to spectrum scope. I happen to like it somewhere in the medium's good. The SD card slot on the FTdx-10 is on the bottom left of the screen area, and it's a full-size SD card, or you can use this mini SD chip and then put it into the adapter. They usually come with them. On the FT-710, I guess they ran out of space on the front, so they put it on the side over here, just to the left of the power switch and tune and Vox switches, off to the left of the main screen. Something small I noticed is that with the FT-710, I looked through the box a few times and I did not find that it came with the side handle, the carrying handle. As where the FTdx-10 does come with the carrying handle. All of the FTdx-10's controls are right around the 2 VFO tuning dials. I call them 2 VFO tuning dials because I use my outer one for VFO tuning mainly. But they're clustered all around here, and they're really sort of tightly packed. So if you've got larger fingers, it's a little bit tight in there. So they tried a little bit of a creative way of taking some of the buttons off of the front area here. First of all, they deleted the outer second multifunction tuning dial, and they added buttons on the top of the radio. They do stick out a little bit from the top of the radio. I don't think that would ever cause a problem, but you do got to look up a little bit to get to them. For navigating around the bands, since we don't have the outer dial, which I like to use for coarse tuning, and then the smaller one for fine tuning on the FTdx-10, on the 710 you just have one tuning VFO knob. So the way we navigate around is that there's a button on the bottom right over here that is fine and fast. So normally it won't show anything on the screen. If you press it once, it shows fine, and you get 1 hertz increment on the tuning dial. And if you hold it in, it will go to fast, and it goes to 100 kilohertz tuning. And if you turn it off, we're going to get 10 kilohertz tuning. And your secondary way of moving around fast is with your step knob over here. You can literally go in 5 kilohertz increments, and I think this may be adjustable. But that way, it's sort of got 4 different tuning speeds, pretty much quickly accessible to move around the band. On the FTdx-10, the way I've got it set up, and I like it, is that I use the outer tuning dial in its normal setting for 100 kilohertz increments. And when I get close, and a lot of guys are on, they're on even numbers, so you can get right there that way. If not, you can use the main tuning dial and tune in 10 hertz increments. Or, of course, you can use the function knob as well if you wanted to set that up for tuning as well. And we also have a fine button down here if you want to get down to the 1 hertz increment. But I find the combination of these 200 kilohertz and 10 kilohertz to, coarse tune, fine tune. Very easy. And then I use the custom switch custom button over here. If I want to change it, I have that set up using it for the sensitivity of the spectrum scope, which I might want to adjust more often than some of the other settings. Turn it off, we're back to using it at 100 kilohertz tuning increments. I'm looking at the FTdx-10 screen here, but they're the same as far as AMC is controlled. This AMC level control keeps you from overdriving the audio into the radio, and I'm not a fan of it, so I leave it at 100, which really takes it right out of the chain and doesn't have any effect. You start cranking this number down and it'll bring sort of a limiter effect in to keep you from overdriving the radio. And if you're trying to set this radio up as per the manual, either of them, using the ALC meter and the AMC and such, it is quite difficult. If you leave the AMC level control at 100, I found that it's much easier to set up the radios correctly on transmit. You'll notice that the menu screen on the FTdx-10 has an extra button over here, Decode, because it offers Decode of CW, PSK31, RTTY, and that's sort of an extra nice feature that they did not include in the 710. On the FT-710, you'll see a couple of extra buttons down here in the menu, and this has to do with the included external speaker function, AESS. And basically what it is using the external speaker and using the internal speaker in the radio at the same time, blending them with this percentage amount over here, and then deciding where you want the crossover switch to be at 700 hertz or 1000 hertz. It's just two selections there. But it's sort of using the speaker in the radio as the more bassy woofer, and the one on the external box as sort of the higher frequency audio delivery system. And it does turn out to be quite nice. You look at the radio side by side and you can see that the 10 is larger in each dimension by a little less than an inch in most cases, but it's a heavier and larger radio.
I can do some of it, but when I run into a real problem, I usually need some help. But my rotator is up. I'm talking to you on a Flex 6600, and my small amplifier, which is an Elecraft 500 watt amp. I've got a Yaesu 5000 here and a 3-element step IR. And for the lower frequencies, a doublet at 65 feet. And then I also have a station down in Florida that I use. This year it may be a K3 I have my hands on. That the condo commandos haven't found yet, going from my 4th floor balcony railing to a tree. So I wonder what you teach. I was a trial lawyer for almost 45 years, I guess. But I was winding it down for a number of years.
One thing I did notice in the way these operate that is different is that when you widen out the bandwidth beyond 3 kilohertz on the FT-710, you can hear a lot more of the high frequencies come in, even on the broadband noises coming in. Watch when I widen it. You can, for those of you who still have hearing above 3 kilohertz, I barely do. Let's take a look or listen, and you can hear that it actually is adding some high frequency components. On the FTdx-10, which has the sort of one stage of analog before the SDR, when I widen out the bandwidth, I don't get as much of the high frequency content coming through. You can almost hear it on just the hiss.
And we know which one we would like to get. and hoping that there's someone that wants to move out of that house. Well, I don't want to wish somebody's going to die, but maybe move from the house to the assisted living or the memory care unit that makes the house available. So that's where we stand on that.
Both of these radios are capable of really, really superb selectivity. The difference in the numbers tested in the labs is, really not going to show much in a couple of dBs once you're at this performance tier. So I can show you SSB signals that are right up next to each other, and you're just not going to hear any bleed unless one of the signals has a tremendous amount of distortion IMD on it.
You're picking me up, and there'll be several more out there, I'm sure. I enjoyed the conversation, and like I said, you're kicking 9 probably. Yeah, Jeremiah 31, verse 3.
Said, I'm not kidding. I mean, that was about as touching a thing as I've heard in a long time. But it said, the Lord appeared Blackhawk located in Peoria, Illinois. Any other check-in?
Because neither of these radios has averaging on the spectral display, it doesn't look like they're ever going to add it. The way to get the nicest display is to adjust the sensitivity such that the grass at the very bottom, the noise, the static noise that can cause the display to show, is just below the threshold like that. And then you're just going to see the signals themselves. So let's take a look at the difference that adjusting the AESS internal versus external speaker balance makes.
And the guys that work with at Ford, they always told me, if you got short power, just use the power. You're paying their daily rent on your campsite and stuff like that, and the power is negotiated into the price there. So just use their power, and it's a lot better, a lot safer, and save you a lot of money there. And my neighbor that cuts my hay, he would get us filled up his diesel fuel tanks there last week one day.
Pretty nice effects. I leave it around 50%. Seems to work best, sound best. One of the questions I've always had is, does a pure SDR, like the FT-710, is it more susceptible to background noise, locally generated random noise, or even extraneous band noise than a SDR with one stage of superhead in front of it, like the 101D, 101MP, and the FTdx-10? So let's take a listen on 20. What I've done is kick on the first preamp so it'll have enough gain. One thing I did notice immediately, though, was to set the scope so that we saw a little bit of what I call grass on here, just where the sensitivity would just show it. I had to crank the 710 up to only plus 6 dB, is where I had to crank up the FTdx-10 to 18 dB to get the same amount of grass on the screen. It could be just a setting kind of thing. But let's take a listen and see what we hear. So here's a blank frequency on 20, FTdx-10. This is both on hex beams, by the way. Switch right to the 710. So I'm seeing S meters 4 or 5, and then occasional pops up to S9 on the 710. Ever so slightly lower on the FTdx-10. Let's take a listen to a fairly low 10-meter CW beacon on both these radios. Both are the same bandwidth, same preamp on, peaking filter, APFs are both on, and we'll just AB them. It's about a S1 to 2 on the FTdx-10, fading in and out, a little bit of QSB. calibration may not be the same on this 710, and it's not moving at all, even when the signal comes up out of the QSB. I really wouldn't give you a nickel for the difference in the performance in this mode at this signal strength level. One of the controls that the FT-710 has as a pure SDR is an RBW control. If we go in here, display, under scope, you'll see RBW. It has to do with the bin width, and that is how fine a granularity is it going to have on the display representing each little slice that the SDR has, or what we call bins. It's got low to high. The default is high, but basically it just has to do with how many fine lines are shown on the screen and how fine that granularity is. It really doesn't make much of a difference. Although the menuing systems are virtually identical, there's some extra features on the 10 here, like Decode, which you'll see, which you don't see represented over here. And then there's an extra button added here on the TXW, which the 10 has as an external push button because it doesn't have so many buttons. We're talking, what, 15 compared to 21, 22? So we've got to put more stuff in the menus. That TXW is just, if you're operating split, that you can press the button and hear your transmit frequency when you're transmitting. But there are also two added extra buttons over here that you're not going to see here because this radio has the AESS dual speaker system where you're blending the internal speaker and the external speaker outside for an interesting sound. And I'd say that combination does sound better than just the single speaker in the FTdx-10. They've just rearranged a few things in the menus. You'll find certain things are just categorized differently, but the same controls are there, like noise blanker, rejection, and width. Well, that's under general here. It's under RxDSP on the 710. A big whoop, so no difference there, and the performance of the blankers is the same. Something I did notice in the 710 that they added was the ability to have your meter be an average or a peaking meter. That's sort of nice. Because the FTdx-10 does decode automatically things like PSK and CW, there are some extra settings in the menus that pertain to that on the 10. An interesting thing I noticed on the 710 was its ability to display its FCC or Canadian certifications on the screen. Now, because I have the plastic still over this, you can't really see it clearly, but this is your status indication, which you know what VFO you're using if you run and split, and it has a number of LEDs that can show the status of the radio. On the 710 here, they're using these two LEDs over here, which can be configured for different colors to show you a basic status report if you're operating split or which VFO you're on. Now, something I'm going to give to the 710 is that I like the position of the RF gain and AF knobs over here. I mean, if I just reach over here with my right hand, they're right there, and they're big knobs, and that's where you'd expect them to be. To have to get with my right hand, or left hand's actually better, to the left side of the main tuning knob over here, the concentric here, AF and RF gain, it's a little less convenient. Because we've got so many more buttons on the FTdx-10 over here, all of their DSP functions have buttons and knobs right here. These concentric knobs will handle all of the DSP functions, shift, width, all of the notching and automatic peaking filter and such. Your DNR switch here and noise blankers over here. So you've got hard buttons for these and knobs to control them. When you're dealing with it on the 710, you're hitting this multifunction button in, and then you can scroll through the different features over here that the DSP is doing, activate them, deactivate them, and adjust them. It's just what they have to do when there is less knobs to deal with and buttons. Although on the 710 they've given you lots of options for tuning your VFO around, this fine, regular, and fast button over here, sliding around, it's certainly not as convenient as having the second ring over here on this one. And, people bellyache about the inconvenience of hitting the wrong buttons and blah, blah, blah. And I just, like I said, I use the thumb on the right hand to hit these buttons over here, and I don't have a problem with it. What is really nice is being able to go 100 kilohertz really fast and then tune in on 10 over here. If I want to go fine, I can hit fine and go to 1. But that makes getting around the band really quick. Yeah, you can do it on this radio, and you can also use the detent knob here to hop around the band really quick. But this is really nice, and plus, with a custom feature here, you can assign this to a lot of different stuff. I find that I'm adjusting the grass, the sensitivity of the spectral scope quite a bit, so that's really handy for me. I just go like so, and or assign it to whatever you want. There's a whole bunch of selections. This was a very good idea, and it just, that's your main interface with the radio, and so it just makes it slightly easier to get around the band. A lot of times I'll find myself spinning the dial on the 710. Oh yeah, hold this, and to go fast, you've got to hold it in for 2 seconds. Okay, now we're going fast. Go back to normal. Well, less buttons. That's what they have to do. Both of these radios have DVI outputs on the back, which is really just a different connector for HDMI. You get an adapter cable, you slap it into a monitor. They both have 2 resolution settings. You want to put it on the finer one. And they both look the same on an external monitor, so I'm not even going to bother showing you. They look great.
Whiskey 1, Quebec, Mike Uniform, 59 Kilo Yankee.
59 in New Hampshire.
QSL, thanks for the call, 73 Kilo.
CQ, Kilo 8 Oscar for Youth on the Air Month. This is Kilo 8 Oscar calling CQ.
Oscar, Kilowatt 8 Oscar, Youth on the Air Month, calling CQ, and standing by. Whiskey 1, Quebec, Mike Uniform, 59 Kilo Yankee.
59 in New Hampshire.
QSL, thanks for the call, 73 Kilo.
CQ, Kilo 8 Oscar for Youth on the Air Month. This is Kilo 8 Oscar calling CQ.
Oscar, Kilowatt 8 Oscar, Youth on the Air Month, calling CQ, and standing by.
You have to remember that Yaesu has a lot of circuits in the can. In other words, they've designed a lot of great circuits for uses in their radios, and they're going to recycle and use those whenever they can. So when they're going from a model like the 10 to the 710, whatever they can recycle within the budget, they're going to. So a lot of the features and functions are going to operate almost identically, like the antenna tuners and such. I mean, you wouldn't give a nickel for the difference of them. So you're going to see that family resemblance because they actually are recycling some of the same designs. All right, so who's the winner? Let's take a look at Bob's very subjective analysis. All right, these are the things that I consider the items that give you satisfaction when operating a radio. The RX selectivity, that is paramount. Of course, the FTdx-10 has it over the 710. We know that. It is really fantastic. I did notice on sensitivity, though, I thought the 710 might have been a slight bit more sensitive. I mean, it's minute, but it just seemed to be. The LCD screen goes to the 10 for sure. It's larger, crispier, punchier, brighter, and it's just big enough that it makes it easy for your fingers to operate around on it. It's doable on the 710, it's just not quite as nice. The RX audio quality is different when you have a pure SDR and one with a mixer in front of it. And the one with a mixer, the 10, sounds a little more analog-y. It doesn't have that crispy, edgy punch that the 710's pure direct sampling SDR technology has. It sounds very similar to a 7300, and for my older ears, I sort of need that. It gives me a little bit more ability to understand what they're saying. A lot of us do have somewhat compromised ears. Transmit quality is identical on these radios. The EQs, the setups, the parameters, I think they pretty much recycled it. And it's good. It's good, but it's an equal number. Ergonomics, I have to give it to the 10 because it's larger, it's just easier to get at, and that second control wheel pushes it over the top. Even though they tried to fix the problem with the buttons being around the VFO tuning dial, I don't know, it still goes to the 10 for me. The I/O interface for the radio is basically identical on both of these radios. Has the video output, the same resolutions, all the stuff, the same remote capabilities where you can attach their additional box and operate the radio remotely. All that stuff's pretty much the same. And features, because the 10 has Decode and in multiple modes, I have to give it the 10 and not a lesser number. The 10 just wins on that because of the Decode. Otherwise, the feature set is basically the same on these. So there's your total, 64 on the 710, FTdx-10, 68.5. Not a heck of a lot more. But my conclusion is, yes, you do get a little bit better radio for a few $100s more, and its larger screen is easier to operate, selectivity is superior on the 10, but I have to say that the resulting audio on the 710 with its direct sampler has a little bit of more in that high frequency range, which helps me with my older ears. I just enjoy it more. Of course, you get the better selectivity on the 10, but that's for you to decide, and it's very subjective audio quality. Take a listen to the radios again. And if you're a contester, you want the extra selectivity. So you do get what you pay for in the 10, and they knew what they were doing. Will you work one more person on the FTdx-10 than you will on the 710? I don't think so. All right, so there you have it. Interesting. Both radios, top-tier performers in selectivity, and weighted just slightly different because of their different innate SDR designs. So you have to make the choice whether a couple $100 more is worth it for the 10 over the 710. Maybe you want the smaller radio, and the external speaker sort of an interesting add-on. It does sound very nice. So I hope this, as they say, disambiguated or cleared up maybe your decision between these two radios. Until next time, take care.